Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, look, I usually show off that I'm an honorary colonel in the British Army. But today I am heavily outranked, and you won't find a panel like this anywhere, I promise you. You can put it right now into Claude or GPT, whatever you want, and say, where will I find 3 4-star generals, a 2-star general, and a British Pakistani lord on the same stage? Nowhere. And so thank you so much for being here. General Hyten, that was a great way to start the day. Thank you for that. A number of folks here will have already been affected in some way or the other by what's happening in the Middle East. Either they have friends, colleagues there, or they have operations, factories, etc., or they're watching the oil price, or markets are acting volatile, etc. And so what would you say to them? How might this play out in the coming days and weeks? Is this a long-term war? Is it a short conflict? Where is it heading?
Well, none of us are sitting in the seats now that tell you exactly what's going to happen. So this is going to be all speculation. But we've all sat in seats where we watch those events very closely, and we still hear from friends that are involved in those. So when you think about what is going on with Iran and what is the end state for Iran, I'll give you the bad news, then I'll give you the good news. So the bad news is that our nations, especially over the last 100 years, have been horrible at thinking about the end state for a conflict before we enter into a conflict. We just don't do that. And so trying to establish an end state when we walk into one without a clear end state established, besides the fact that there needs to be a change in Iran, makes it very difficult. That's the bad news. The good news is, I'll just say from my own perspective of watching Iran pretty close for the last 25 years, is there had to be a change. Something had to change in that country. And we were going to a place that was going to be very dangerous for the world. Iran with a nuclear weapon, with a stated objective of removing Israel from the world, is a situation that can't be allowed to exist. So when you just destroy their nuclear capability for a while, they build it back up. Destroy the nuclear capability, they build it back up. Eventually, that had to change. So we have to go after the capability, but the leadership has to change as well. That will be interesting. When President Trump said the other day, I'm ready to reach out to Iran and talk, that's our desire. We want to talk about what the future of Iran is, but it needs to be in a much more peaceful coexistence in that part of the world than has been there before. I think that will be the long term. I don't think we'll be in a military operation for years and years and years. It'll be days, weeks, or months. That'll be the measurement, and then we'll be in a point of discussion where we have to figure out what that future is going to be. But that's kind of my thought.
General Scaparrotti, you've been Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. That's huge. And NATO's initial reaction was that we want to stay out of this completely. This is what they've been saying as an alliance and individual members. But today, Turkey has just said a couple of hours ago that one of the NATO missile defense systems was activated against an incoming projectile. Is it sustainable that NATO stays out of this? What will be the role of NATO in this conflict?
Well, what the Secretary General said was that NATO's not going to be involved in this, but we do have a responsibility to protect the nations within the alliance, and I expect they will take necessary actions as well. He noted that individual nations can take those actions. And I think that was a response at that time to French base had been attacked, UK base in Cyprus had been attacked, and now Turkey. So I believe that that was a recognition that it could go further on his part without stating it. But that's what they're sworn to do, and I'm not surprised that's the steps we took.
Any possibility that this might be an Article 5 situation in the next weeks, months at all?
Say again?
Might this trigger a collective NATO response if there's further attacks in Cyprus and other places?
It could. It could. That'll be decided by the NAC. But it's hard to project how this might roll out. But the alliance is committed to the 32 nations in their defense and defense of their population. And I am quite certain that's what they'll do. And if they see that necessity, they'll take those steps. And they're ready to do that.
General Messenger, the US president said yesterday that the British Prime Minister is not exactly Churchill. What did he mean by that?
Well, I think he was slightly disappointed by the response of the UK in supporting the American action.
Not that he's exactly Roosevelt either. Right?
Yeah. And let's face it, Winston Churchill was one of a kind, and not many of him appear throughout history. So I don't think our Prime Minister will be taking that too much to heart. From our perspective, to sort of, support what Mike said, it's about protecting our assets, it's about protecting our people, it's about supporting our allies in a predominantly defensive and supportive way.
But there is a disappointment, long-standing now, that the UK is just not doing enough. How do you feel about that? We just heard about a warship, that's a British warship, that's going to take another week, 10 days to go into theatre. Are we doing enough?
I think we're doing what we can. I think that the UK, along with most middle powers, has struggled to balance the need to stay abreast of technology so that it's able to deliver in a high-tech, day one, night one fight, at the same time as providing the mass, the ubiquity, and the presence that you require in order to have a different type of a military effect. And when you're the size that we are, that's a very difficult thing to do both of. And I think we've slightly struggled with that. But I think with the decisions that have been made about increasing our defense budget, the decisions that other European nations are taking to increase their defense budget, I can see that improving over time.
General Fay, you've seen numerous cycles of digital transformation in defense. What do you see now in this conflict in Ukraine? How much AI is actually being used in the battlefield today?
So I think we're genuinely at an inflection point in where technology is starting to come to bear. So I think defense is not an early adopter. It takes time. Somebody spoke about the courage to do that. That is an issue, there's no question. Very conservative decision-making in many ways because despite the huge operational risks we're prepared to take, we're not prepared to take a lot of procurement risks in the same way. And so I see now nations, but particularly if we bring it back to the NATO alliance, the NATO alliance now leading the way with trying to deploy AI in different guises in order to maintain operational tempo against the adversaries, the enemy, whoever you want to describe in that. And effectively, where we are at the moment is what I describe as sort of the heroic efforts of staff officers trying to manage one of the most complex enterprises in the world of spreadsheets and notebooks and pencils. It's a little bit more advanced than that, but fundamentally, that's what they're trying to do. And the game changer now we've got into the cloud and AI era where defense is adopting that. And dare I say, the US military leading the way there, and people can really see where the advantages of taking this on are. We're really starting to see real opportunities now to change the game. I think earlier on we talked about velocity. Velocity is, speed in one direction. What we talk about is tempo. How quickly and how regularly can you make the right decisions with the right information? And that's what AI does for you.
General Scaparrotti, is NATO ready for embracing AI?
I think they are. I think if you look at the changes that NATO's made in, say, the past 5 years, they've been pretty aggressive about this. They've established a digital strategy for the alliance. They've done other things in terms of bringing in emerging technologies, innovation fund, Diana, to actually close that gap between the commercial and military world, et cetera. They have laid out the standards for AI in terms of interface and data management, et cetera. That's huge in an alliance where everything has to be done by a consensus of 32 nations. That's a lot of work, and I think it's an indicator of where they want to go. And now they're not only talking about it or laying down institutional norms, they've actually bought AI and beginning to use it. So where are they at? I think they're leaning into it very heavily. The issue will be that gap. It's the courage that was talked about, because now it's got to go beyond that operational strategic level to the nations. And in the end, in NATO, it's the nations that purchase the things used at tactical level.
So as the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, one of my roles was to co-chair with the NATO Allied Commander Transformation, which is in Suffolk, Virginia, co-chair a joint board looking at the integration of US technologies and NATO technologies. And the two NATO commanders I work with, they're both French officers, General Lanata and General Levine, and they were driven by Secretary General Stoltenberg, too, who I give a lot of credit for driving nuclear back into NATO, AI into NATO, digital transformation, those kind of pieces. He was a visionary leader, and he drove. But those two French generals, they embraced those pieces, and they were working with us and trying to figure out how to bring those capability into the alliance from NATO, and having that transformation command in Suffolk actually allows the integration of US technology a little bit easier than if it was all in Europe.
And the present SAC-T is really forward-leaning as well and very innovative. I've met with him, and they're running several pilots that they'll actually, I think, take into the operational side here as they work their way through it.
And that's how you got to move fast. Again, we talked this morning, you heard it over and over again about speed across the enterprise. Yeah. The NATO enterprise is as complex as any enterprise I can imagine because of the 32 nations and to get agreement. But in the overall scheme of things, they're moving amazingly fast.
General Messenger, it's voluntary what nations buy. NATO can't tell you what to buy. They can make suggestions, etc. And how do you deal with the situation where one country might say that a particular model, Anthropic, etc., we shouldn't be using? How would you react in that situation?
I think the key is the authority that NATO is able to provide in those central coordinating functions like information systems, logistics systems, medical systems. Because frankly, it's in no nation's interest to be out of kilter with the remainder of the alliance on that. So setting the standards and resourcing the solution centrally means that the nations will follow. There are plenty of capabilities where that doesn't have to be the case because that detailed coordination isn't as important in certain functions. But for those large coordinating pieces, I think it's NATO that should be driving the interoperability agenda, and then the nations have really no choice but to follow.
General Faye, you've actually been deploying tech with NATO. Can you tell us a bit about what you've been doing with C3 as much as you can with NATO?
Yeah, and I think it comes back to exactly what we've just been saying. So NATO, however complex an organization is, NATO has got AI policy, and it's already told nations, this is how we're going to do AI. And that just makes how you develop AI much, much easier, because now you've got a roadmap, if you like, that NATO's trying to follow. We've partnered, my company's partnered with C3, back to my point where NATO is starting to move out on, it's not fantasy anymore, so we are in contractual delivery to develop a AI-powered tool for managing the sort of theatre enablement and sustainment of the European theatre. Now, let me give you an idea of the scale of that. So, more than 1 million soldiers, more than 350,000 pieces of highly complex equipment, starting from 32 different starting points, all converging into continental Europe, and all of them then need to be, staged through, married up, trained, bombed up, moved forward, and not just in any order, in the order, of course, that the operational design requires. It's in military terms, it's about as complicated as it gets. You've seen these big deployments over the years. Enabling the European theatre is probably, I think, the most complex logistics challenge I've ever seen, mainly because of all of the aspects of it. There are functional and physical elements to what you've got to manage. So there's the obvious ones like ports, airports, flows, modes, nodes, all that kind of thing. But then you've also got all the regulations and things that go with it. So bottom line is NATO's moving out. We are on contract to deliver this. I think their eyes have been opened on the power of enterprise AI in highly deployable, configurable capabilities, which is what C3 brings to this.
General Hyten, there's been this talk, which I've never been a fan of over the last couple of years, on sovereign AI. And now President Trump has told US diplomats to lobby countries against sovereign data as a policy, which I think makes absolute sense. How do you deal with the fact that a number of these members might want to have sovereign capabilities, whereas the best tech might not be sovereign?
So it's, I'll actually use a nuclear model to answer the question. So NATO was formed as a nuclear alliance back in the 1940s. And it was structured so that the American nuclear capability would be the umbrella for the NATO alliance. Over the years, that alliance transformed into many ways. England developed nuclear capabilities, France developed nuclear capabilities, it broadened. We have nuclear capabilities inside NATO. And the French have said, our nuclear weapons are only for the sovereign protection of our country. Now, just last week, they announced that it's going to expand across Europe. Here's the interesting thing. The existence of a nuclear weapon is a deterrent capability in itself. If, God forbid, a nuclear war ever happened, do you think France is on the outside? Which is, you hope it never happens, and you hope the French capabilities are part of that deterrence. Data, you can say data is sovereign, but data is data. The existence of the data is going to be there, and we're going to have to share data in order to effectively fight as an alliance. It's just going to be there. You can't get around it. So a nation can say, my data is sovereign. I'm never going to share it. It can't happen, and it won't happen, because we will figure it out. I remember going into an air operations center the first time, having been through exercise and exercise and exercise about not sharing information with allies. And I walk into a live air operations center, and there's the French, and there's the English, and there's the British, sorry. There's the Singaporeans with 2 C-130s. And son of a gun, we share information seamlessly in the vaults all the time in order to get the job done. To say that data is sovereign in a nation where you operate in an alliance is just, it's not real.
Are you happy with the French saying that we want to provide an alternative security guarantee to the U.S. because they're not a stable partner?
So I think I'm happy with the French expanding their deterrent model across Europe. I look at that as the first step to expanding that deterrent model across the entire alliance. I really do. I think that's a step down that path. I applaud the French for reaching out and saying we're covering Europe. But guess what? We have a lot more nuclear weapons than any other country in the world. That umbrella is for Europe, it's for Japan, it's for Korea, it's for Australia, it's for other nations that don't have it. We provide an extended deterrent for the entire world, and we'll continue to do that. And the existence of those capabilities provides that deterrent. We need to message it better, but I love the fact that the French are reaching out inside of Europe.
General, is NATO interacting enough with the industrial base, enough with tech companies? Is there enough tech coming in, you feel?
I'm sorry?
NATO, are they interacting enough with the tech world? Is there enough tech being brought in?
I don't think there's enough. I mean, I've met in NATO in the last year to talk to the SecGen with a number of others about how you actually bring in emerging technologies, different companies, startups, et cetera. As you know, Europe has been more restrictive than the United States. There's really two different worlds going on there. And what they're trying to do is overcome some of those restrictions so that other foreign companies or even European companies have have greater access to the needs of the industrial base in each nation, and also what NATO needs as as an alliance. So, but again, the fact that the SecGen was bringing together people from technology to see how NATO can change, accelerate that, is a good indication of how they're leaning into it. But no, there are some gaps there, and there's some restrictions that have to be dealt with to accelerate their industrial base today.
General Messenger, we saw last week that 3 F-15s, was it, General Hyten, were shot down by friendly fire. Given all the tech in the world, all the tech that's being deployed, the fog of war is still real, and these things continue to happen. And so, and it's probably U.S. equipment which is taking down those U.S. aircraft. And so, despite all the tech, doesn't war still remain just a very physical business?
I think the technology overlays on the basic human nature of war, and the basic human nature of war is gritty, confusing, and doesn't have the clarity that you would always wish. I think the thing that technology can and is really doing, and I thought the Guru chat earlier was a real great example of that, is really reducing that lack of clarity so that people have the best facts to hand that they can. Now, there'll always be tricky, nasty decisions to make, but if you're confident that you've got the best information you can, then you feel able as a military professional to do your job and make decisions, some of which can be hard, and many of which will involve human lives.
General Fay, is there enough cash coming into defense tech now? Is, from pension funds and other institutional investors, is there enough cash?
So I think, again, the paradigm's changing on investment in defense. It's less a NATO thing and more a nations thing. It's nations who will go and look for that investment. But I mean, only a couple of years ago, most boards were very cautious about investing in defense. And I think that's changed. And it's changing all the time now. Because now, of course, with everything that's going on in the world, defense is the security blanket that business needs in order to operate. And I think people are much more clear in their minds that an investment in defense is a good investment. And I think also the kind of investment they can now make, either in tech or in infrastructure, are the kind of investments over a long time that, from a board perspective, if you like, gives the returns that means that not only is it something that people want to invest in, but it now becomes an attractive proposition as well from a business perspective. And I think that's really changed.
General Hyten, this is the year, or the Chinese year of the fire horse. I was in Asia last year, it was a big Chinese New Year celebration. And one of the bits of celebration were these robots dancing, amazing sort of robot performance. The Chinese defense robots are way, way advanced already. Whereas NATO is still trying to figure out which standards to use, what to bring in, how to bring in this pension fund cash, etc. How will you keep up with adversaries and competitors who are doing their own thing in their own terms?
Well, robots to me are a dangerous thing. I just go back to Stephen, the CEO's presentation this morning about HAL 9000, right? If you give the decision responsibility that involves lethal force to a robot, then bad things are going to happen. That's how you end up in a World War III. I don't think that AI should ever be involved in a lethal decision. The decision to take a human life has got to be made by a human. And I tell you what, that's one of the most difficult decisions that's ever put on leaders in the military, because when you employ military force, I mean, it costs human life. So when you talk about Chinese robots, that scares the heck out of me. But the Chinese are building AI-driven robots. They are. But what is a drone? Is a drone a robot? It depends on who controls the employment of the lethal force. And I think there has to be a hook back into that. So you have to be able to stay up with it. You have to understand they have a different value system than we do. You have to understand their structure in building that. And you have to, within our value system and within our alliance, you have to build capabilities to deny those capabilities from being employed on a battlefield. That's just what you have to do. This is the continuing saga all the way back. One of my, I think I shared it a couple years ago in this forum, favorite quotes of all time, John Kennedy giving a speech at Houston, Texas, rallying the nation to build Apollo and go to the moon. He said, space science like nuclear science, and then you can see the handwritten thing that he put in. So space science and nuclear science, and he handwrites in, and all other technologies have no conscience of their own. Whether they're a force of good or a force of evil depends on man, and only if the United States operates a position of preeminence can we hope to actually control that future. I look at that and other technologies, and I think about AI, I think about quantum, I think about the things that are coming. Humans make those decisions. We have those decisions. But we have to go fast in AI. We can't just let the Chinese drive that because we're too slow in dealing with what the issues are. The way we figure it out is by going fast and learning. That's the way we have to do it.
General Messenger, do you agree? British generals usually agree with American generals.
I totally agree. And I think I've heard the argument that could lead to a technical advantage amongst our adversaries. What I say to them is don't underestimate the strategic advantage of your moral position and your values-based standpoint. That has a power of its own that ultimately will win out. So it's a difficult debate. It's not a black and white debate, but I think there is something very important about retaining our sort of values and our judgments on this.
Scaparrotti, will NATO be around in this form in 20 years?
Yes, absolutely.
If you were going to found NATO today, would it look different to what it looks like right now?
If I were founding it today, I think it would be, without a doubt, more European. It'd be more digital from the start. It'd be connected by cloud. And I think much of what we talked about today is what you would start with. And you could, because NATO, like any other enterprise or any other organization, you've got to work your way through a culture now. Yeah. If you were standing it up, I think you'd start with those things and bring the 32 nations together.
Are you bullish about NATO?
I'm very bullish about NATO. This is the most successful alliance in history. So NATO's reinvented itself, changed its direction a number of times. But what you can't beat is the power of that coalition when it comes together, however difficult that is to manage. And coming back to the point about, so information, therefore, is central to that management, because I guess one of the criticisms of the past is how long it takes to get consensus and how you bring the information together to make that compelling. And this is where AI, I could not agree more. It's information at machine speed, but for humans to make decisions. And that's the difference. That's the real game changer.
And I think we have to look beyond simply military forces in this. I think ever more important is the defense industrial base of the member nations and the collective power of that. You know, these are no longer seen as providers. They're seen as genuine strategic advantage if one can leverage your defense industrial base, and you can be agile and flexible in your relationship with it. And I think that's an area that is developing fast at the moment. I don't think we're there yet, but I think when we start thinking about NATO, we need to start thinking about our economic and industrial heartlands as well.
So just a real quick observation, Speaker McCarthy, he works with C3, and I think he's around today. He likes to make this observation, so do I. And the observation is that the last time we had great power war on this planet ended in 1945, over 80 years ago. That's the longest period on this planet without great power conflict, without great power war, since the era of Rome and the Roman legions. This just happens on this planet all the time. This conflict between great powers happens continuously. And it hasn't happened. And one of the reasons is because of NATO. That's why that kind of alliance is so essential in making sure we help preserve the peace. Because when you have these nations come together, the deterrent value is enormous.
We've got 20 seconds left, General. Tell us what keeps you up at night, if anything.
God, I sleep like a baby now. You know, I wake up every 3 hours and I'm crying. No, but I sleep great now. It is amazing. I was with my family, and you know, my wife's been through a hard time the last year, and we went to Hawaii for our first vacation in a year and a half with the kids and grandkids. Playing with a 5-year-old and 3-year-old in an ocean all day. I went to bed at 8 o'clock at night and I woke up at 7 in the morning. That is glorious. I highly recommend it.
General Messenger, British generals also sleep very well.
This is going to disappoint everyone. I sleep like a baby. I love
Excellent.
it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much all for your time today. Honestly, that was such a privilege. And thank you for your service, generals. Thank you.